Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little, and I'm here today with the 17th episode of Weekly Poker Hand. And today I want to discuss with you a situation that I think a lot of players mess up whenever they are short stacked. Most people think that playing the short stack is super easy, but in reality, it is at least somewhat difficult because quite often people think they just need to be going all in a lot. But going all in is not necessarily the right thing to do whenever you do have 20 big blinds or so. So in this hand, we have pocket aces. Aces are good. The blinds are 50, 100. We have 2,000 chips and the cutoff seat. The player in second position raises, a player in middle position calls, and now it's up to me with the pocket aces. I think that most players in this scenario either re-raise small or they go all in. And I think that both of those are probably the incorrect play, unless you have been shoving a lot recently. If you've been very active recently, then I definitely think you need to play this hand just like you would play your other hands and be very aggressive with it. But if you don't have an image such that you've been shoving a lot, you should probably call and make your opponent think you're trying to see a flop with a hand that has pretty good implied odds. So, of course, your opponents may recognize that you're only calling in this scenario with very good hands like aces and kings. That's pretty much it. With all your other hands, you probably just want to be going all in because stealing 550 chip pot is often significant. But with exactly your best hands against players who do not know your strategy, I think you want to call in this scenario because you really want to get an additional continuation bet or post-flop bet in general out of your opponents. So I do like to call. Also, the big blind calls as well. So even though the pot is four ways, this is still a fine outcome for me. I feel like a lot of players have this in their mind where if you see a flop with aces five ways, you're going to lose half the time. And a lot of people take this concept to think, oh, I don't want that. I don't want to lose half the time. I want to win every time. And so what they do is they blow their opponents out of the pot to where they just win a very small pot. But you have to recognize that if you can get 3 or 4 other guys to put money into the pot, you only need to win 25% of the time to break even, and you're going to win way more than that. I'm probably going to be winning closer to 50% of the time or more. You also have to realize that 50% statistic means that everyone gets to see the river, and of course that's not going to happen. Like say a guy with 9-8 bets and then I go all in, the guy with 3-2 and ace-6, all those hands are going to be folding, and those hands have equity, and that silly statistic counts those. You're going to find that a lot of the math, particularly that amateur players quote that deal with poker, is irrelevant. I mean, I know that probably sounds bad because poker is a math game, but the fact that you're going to lose half the time with aces when you see a flop five ways, that doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't tell you how the money goes in. It doesn't tell you if you're getting it in good, if you're going to be getting it in bad, et cetera, et cetera. So what this amounts to is you want to see a flop with pocket aces. I actually wrote an article about this for, I think it was Card Player, maybe a year ago, because a lot of these hands are hotly contested where I am recommending players see flops with pretty good hands. A lot of players think that you want to make your opponents fold when you have a very good hand, but that is the exact opposite of what you want to. You want to keep your opponents in the pot when they are crushed. And before the flop, and often on the flop, when you have pocket aces, your opponents are crushed. So I call, we see the flop four ways, and I'm happy with this. I'm not unhappy. It comes 8-6-3 with 2 hearts. I have the ace of hearts, so this is an amazing flop. Then the initial raiser bets 400. So now he's betting 400 to the 850 chip pot, and I have 1800 left. You may think that if I call in this scenario, it should be blatantly clear to my opponent that I have a good hand, and maybe it is. But quite often, especially if you're playing smaller stakes games, or if you're playing, say, the World Series of Poker, your opponents just aren't going to care. I mean, they're going to think that they have a good hand with their 9-8 or their pocket 10s, and they're just going to stack off every time. So I think calling's probably going to be ideal, unless you have a good reason to think that the initial raiser has a hand that he perceives to be very good. Of course, if you think he has kings, just go ahead and re-raise and get it all in. Or if you think he has a hand he's never folding, just go ahead and get it all in. Also, I think a lot of players are really concerned with protecting their aces. They despise getting outdrawn. But getting outdrawn is acceptable. You have to recognize when you only have 20 big blinds, you have to make something happen and you have to get chips. And if you have to incur a little bit of risk to make that happen, that's acceptable. So I like calling in this scenario, although I could certainly see situations where shoving would be way better. The guy in the big blind folds, so now we're heads up. And I want to make it clear, I'm never folding on any turn card if this guy bets again. And he does just go all in. So I don't really know what this guy is expecting me to have, but he clearly doesn't care. And this is a really good example of what I was just discussing. I mean, my hand, if he knows my strategy, looks exactly like aces or kings. And that should be obvious, but it's not, because my opponent does not know my strategy. So he shoves. Of course, like I said, I'm calling every time, every time happily. And he shows up with pocket nines, and I win. So it's worth mentioning that if we go back to this hand before the flop and think about this, he raised to 2 big blinds. Someone called. If I would have went all in, he probably would have called with his pocket nines. We would have gotten it all in, and we would have won, which is a good thing. So if I think that player is raising from early position with only very good hands, I should be fine with just re-raising and getting it all in. But if I think he's raising a wider range of stuff like 9-8 and King-7 and King-Jack and King-Queen and stuff like that, then I don't want to re-raise, because that's going to result in him folding. And I really don't want him to fold. So against tight players who are raising from early position, you should be much happier shoving or re-raising, one of the two. And against very loose players, you should be much more happy calling, because those are going to be the players who do not pay you off if you re-raise. So always think about that and think about your opponent's range. Don't get in the habit of thinking, Jonathan said to call whenever you have 20 big blinds with aces versus a raise and a call. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in this scenario against these players, it's probably ideal. But in other scenarios against other players, it's quite possibly not ideal. So recognize that even though I'm giving you guys very exact examples in Weekly Poker Hand, this podcast, you need to always try to make a point to think, when would things be different? And when would I need to alter what is being displayed here? And usually if the stacks are different or your players are different, that is going to be a very large determining factor in changing things. So try to develop a very robust strategy where you have ideas of what to do in every scenario. And from there, you'll be able to figure out what to do in even more spots as people throw you curveballs and do bizarre things. So thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. If you like this podcast, please rate it on iTunes, leave a review. And if you don't like it, please let me know what I can do to improve. I'm more than happy to try to make this podcast as good for you guys as I possibly can. I love giving back to the community. I love helping the players who want to learn. And if you're watching this podcast, it means you want to learn. So let me know what I can do better. Thank you guys very much for watching. This has been Jonathan Little for Weekly Poker Hand.